Welcome back, everybody, to the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. This week, we are covering dueling federal AI frameworks, a variety of ideas on that front, what federal rules should look like, a Fed rate cut, it's about time, a big Bitcoin day and evening on the Hill, which we'll fill you in about, President Trump greeted by pomp and circumstance in Great Britain, and much more. But remember to follow me on X at MorganSternNJ. Follow the pod here on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, Zach, let us dive right in.
All right. It's a wild week, a fun week. So on the heels of the Trump administration releasing some great reports and executive orders on AI, Congress is finally beginning to wade a little deeper into the AI regulatory debate. And so there were a pair of AI proposals that were released recently that provide sort of dueling banjos. So you've got the first bill that was introduced by Senator Ted Cruz that would create an AI sandbox. And then the second plan wasn't a bill, but it was a plan, a framework called the AI for America plan was introduced by Senator Mark Kelly. And that would, quote, require tech companies to contribute to a fund intended to help society adjust to the technology's impact on jobs, infrastructure, and the environment. So, Brian, what is your take on these sort of differing approaches being considered in the Senate?
Yeah, I mean, I think Senator Cruz's approach is the right one. I think we need to give this area of the economy room to grow, room to run, room to thrive. We still have no real idea. I mean, we have some limited idea, but we don't know where this is going to go in terms of the productivity it's going to add. We're already seeing certain trends that, new coding can be done a lot faster. People can find the answers to questions a lot faster. You can process things. You can do risk-based analysis for things like, tracking terrorist financing or tracking fraud if you're a financial institution. I mean, there's just such a wide variety of uses for this. But it's still early days. And last week, we discussed with Alex Thorne the fact that, this kind of AI moment came on so fast. And the fact that ChatGPT is so widely used. I mean, ChatGPT didn't exist a couple of years ago. So I think the, regulate first, ask questions later is part of the reason why the Biden team lost the election, because the techno-optimists said, you are stifling us. And they ended up, for that and a variety of other reasons, ended up drifting into the president's camp. But I also think it's a reasonable position that you should let us have a sandbox. We talked about regulatory sandboxes in the first Trump administration. I helped a very small part, but I helped out on the Treasury Department's report on financial regulation. And we talked about sandboxes for new innovation and how if a new use case that is going to create efficiencies, it's going to create value, doesn't quite fit into the current frameworks. It might be a bit of a square peg in a round hole. There should be a mechanism to allow these types of companies to grow and then identify things where maybe you do need to set some fair rules of the road. So I think Senator Cruz's sandbox approach is not necessarily new. Europeans have been using, I think, regulatory sandboxes for a while. Commissioner Peirce at the SEC has been arguing for regulatory sandboxes in financial technology in particular. So I think that Senator Cruz's approach is a welcome one to essentially be able to have these companies, if they think they might have some friction, regulatory friction, essentially submit an application to the government to say, give us some relief while we grow and work this out. Give a chance for little tech to not be stifled in the crib, essentially. Senator Kelly's plan reminds me of the Ronald Reagan quote, government's view of the economy can be summed up in a few short phrases. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidize it. He's going, we already see this ecosystem growing. So he goes straight to the taxing approach. We don't yet know what the impact on jobs is going to be. It may create tons of more jobs. We already know that there's a huge demand for tradesmen, for electricians, for engineers, for construction. I mean, there's a lot of jobs that are coming out of the AI ecosystem. Other jobs may be affected in a negative way. They probably don't need as many junior computer programmers, things like that. But this idea that you're just going to create a slush fund to then be allocated by Washington instead of the private markets and what the companies actually need in terms of their workforce. It's stupid. It's a bad idea. Senator Cruz's idea is much better. I don't know if either one has enough of a consensus to move, to be perfectly honest, but yet at least. But these things take time. The ideas are introduced, they're batted around. Eventually, some bill text will come out. And then probably 2 or 3 Congresses from now, maybe we'll see something. I don't think either one is imminent. But if you're asking which approach is better, let the ecosystem grow and develop, or just shoot it with a cannon full of taxes. I favor the first approach. So I don't know. Those are my thoughts in a nutshell. What do you think?
Everything you said was fantastic. I think you captured it well. I know that think tanks certainly love sandboxes as well, and so I'm sure a lot of the folks in the think tank space will love Senator Cruz's approach. And I think the point that you made about what Alex Thorne said last week is you look at the history of AI, and it goes back to sort of the World War II code breaking era, but really as a technology that where you have all of those factors come together, where you have the technology, the computing speed, the energy. It really has burst onto the scene just in the last few years. This was something that wasn't even on my radar really that much when I started the Technology Policy Center at the think tank that I used to work at. And so I think all of those points that you made are great. Is let the technology flourish. Don't stifle it and create a tax, a slush fund, a universal basic income type thing initially. So, and as you said, getting ideas out into this policy space, this is what Congress is for. You have ideas, we debate them, some are heard, some aren't. So we'll see what ultimately happens. Sort of as a point, we have the policy landscape, which we just discussed, but an important factor is public opinion. And there was a Pew poll that came out this week, maybe even yesterday, on what Americans want and don't want AI to do. So according to this graphic that we'll put up on the screen, Americans seem okay with things like using AI for weather forecasts, detecting fraud, developing medicines, and things like that. But they're a little more skeptical of using AI to provide mental health support, select jurors, or create, pick relationships like on dating apps. So in light of, the sort of techno optimist angle that we just discussed, what's your take on this sort of new poll? I know we kind of have a pro AI techno optimist mindset, but it's an interesting exercise to sort of step back and think more broadly about how does public opinion factor into AI or any technological innovation?
Well, I think it's sort of premature, and I find it hard to believe that 5,000 adults have fully formulated their opinions. What percentage of them are actually using it on a day-to-day basis? I will say, as somebody who uses it frequently, um, it is not a panacea. It's not a cure-all. It adds some efficiencies. It makes it a little easier to get deeper on a subject, a little bit faster. It can help draft things quicker. It can point you in the direction of reliable primary sources, sift through the unreliable ones, especially if you're using it on a subject that you're already familiar with. But it's not perfect. So in terms of these, subjects, I think that eventually AI will be useful in helping you get information you need to pursue all of these subjects, whether it's trying to figure out what's going to happen with the weather, or whether it's, you know, maybe it is talking about your faith. And like, I want to find out what Thomas Aquinas said about, a certain topic. Like, AI can help you get answers faster. So, maybe if you are looking for, maybe if you're having a tough time relationship wise and you want to figure out, here are my traits. What would be a good match for me? What should I have as my priority? Like, maybe it could be helpful in that realm someday. It doesn't take out the human judgment, the free will that God gave us. It's not perfect, but it can help in almost unlimited ways, but it's not, it's not a cure all. So I think it's an interesting poll to see where people are at right now. I also just think it's a snapshot in time, and it's not particularly informative in terms of where things are going to go in the future. I don't know. Those are my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and educating the public and lawmakers and things like that on what the technology is, what it can do, what it can't do. And even, having conversations. I mean, even, Senator Cruz's AI bill contemplates, hey, maybe there's some areas, that we should not use AI, maybe yet. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting poll, and it's interesting to see, that's a great thing. I mean, Pew does a lot of polling, and so we'll see and a lot of other people do polls, but we'll see a poll, a year from now, and things could be very different. So we'll continue to follow that as well. Moving on to the next story yesterday, a lot of news. People were anticipating this greatly. The Fed cut interest rates 0.25% to 4.25%. And that was the first time they'd done that in 9 months. I'm sure that the battle between President Trump and Fed Chair Powell will intensify because the president's been calling for even bigger cuts, and sometimes his job. But Brian, what do you think? I want to look at this kind of from two lenses. What do you think will be the impact of this rate cut on the economy generally? And then I've also seen some interesting articles or discussion a little bit about, will it have an impact on Bitcoin specifically?
Yeah, so let's look at the most obvious effects. So when the Fed lowers rates, generally you're going to see short-term borrowing costs go down. That increases liquidity. So short-term borrowing costs, think credit cards, auto loans, things, maybe floating rate mortgages or other loans that are sort of tethered to the Fed rate. So that creates, more liquidity in the market. The idea here is, the Fed's dual mandate, which is coming under scrutiny, by the way, as to whether the dual mandate is the right framework. But their dual mandate is price control to try to control inflation, and it's employment to try to reach maximum employment. This cut is in response to some pretty dreary jobs numbers. We saw a downward revision of like 900,000 jobs. We saw, we missed estimates in terms of job creation last month. So they're seeing weakening in the job market. They want to create more liquidity for that side of their mandate. And generally speaking, if companies are able to have more affordable lines of credit, it means they'll have more liquidity. It's easier for them to hire people. In terms of the longer term effects, this is not always necessarily true, but you can see longer term debt start to at least stabilize or come down a little bit. So think mortgage rates, longer term fixed personal loans if people are remodeling their houses, things like that. That the longer term effects, and again, it's not a direct causation, but oftentimes the cost of these things come down when that Fed rate comes down. And the residential housing market is something the president is very concerned with because we've seen such a squeeze on families over the last several years. And that's one of the downsides of inflation. When the dollar loses purchasing power, it means people with assets see those assets appreciate. People who are living paycheck to paycheck just see their buying power go down. So you've seen the cost of housing become more unattainable for your average family. And lowering the rates it's not a guarantee, but can help start to see some of the financing for homes come down, become more affordable. So that sector of the economy may be aided. Now, in terms of the stock market, generally, I think this rate cut was priced in. I don't think you saw a tremendous amount of movement in the stock market when the rate cut was announced because you look at all the prediction markets, they're overwhelmingly favoring the quarter point cut. So it was pretty much priced in. But when there is more liquidity, you usually see asset prices go higher. So I think in the medium term, stock market will probably benefit, especially because the Fed also signaled that it's likely to do at least 2 more rate cuts before the end of the year. So you're going to see the cost of money come down, which means that there'll be more borrowing, more spending, hopefully more hiring. I mentioned the dual mandate, employment, that seems to be what they're aiming at now, and price control. Well, when you create more liquidity in the market, oftentimes prices will go up a little bit. That means asset prices will probably go up a little bit. So we will probably see a healthy stock market. Now, in the bond market, interest rates go down. It makes bonds a little less attractive. However, our borrowing costs as the U.S. federal government are very troubling, to say the least. We're talking about $1 trillion just in debt service. So seeing the interest rates go down will hopefully be pretty good for the dollar and be a little bit more healthy for our federal balance sheet. More liquidity, like I said, you may see a little bit of inflation or asset prices going up. That I'm sort of contradicting myself, but that also leads to potentially a little less purchasing power of the dollar. People tend to, you see a flight of capital from the dollar into assets like commodities, gold, oil, Bitcoin, et cetera. So they'll probably be pretty healthy, I would think, through the end of the year now that we're into a cutting cycle. I think that Bitcoin, the market has matured to the point where I don't think I don't want to go against the bulls because I usually consider myself a bull. I don't know that we're going to see the kind of parabolic moves at this point because the market is so liquid. We saw some downside signals where, there was some estate planning, like Bitcoin bulls who were selling billions of dollars of Bitcoin in executing the estate plans. We didn't see a whole lot of price action on the downward movement. I think likewise, probably on the upward movement, we'll see a more gradual rise. I do think we're going to see a rise because there's more demand than supply. More and more institutions are coming in, more corporations, potentially more sovereigns coming in. And the number of Bitcoin mined per day is still like 400 Bitcoin a day or something. So if we're still seeing more inflows than Bitcoin created, the price is still going to go up. I just think it's reached a level of maturity where we're going to see less of these massive peaks or valleys. But I think Bitcoin is starting to get a little bit closer to a typical commodity type play. So I think it will move probably not in lockstep, but maybe in a similar fashion to commodities like gold. Want to make sure I touch on this. So you mentioned Tom Lee from the Ethereum company BitMine. He thinks Bitcoin and Ethereum are going to make a monster move in the next 3 months. I don't know if he's right. Like I just said, I probably wouldn't put all my eggs in that basket. But if he's right, then that's great for all of us who hold Bitcoin. So I don't want to root against him. I just think he's probably talking his book a little bit and being a little bit optimistic. So I think it's a good thing that they've started this rate cutting cycle. I think the fundamental flaw or a fundamental flaw in the way the Fed operates is that it is always backward looking. And the Fed chair even said, we can't be making the right decisions if we're always looking in the rearview mirror. And yet, out of the other side of his mouth, he always points out that they're data dependent and all the data is backward looking data that always gets revised. Which is it, man? Like, this is one of the reasons why I think the president's probably frustrated with him. But overall, the rate cut is too late, as the president would say. I agree with that. I think we've seen some signals that should have prompted rate cuts sooner, but at least they're coming along finally. And I think they should step on the gas and start lowering rates a little bit faster through the end of the year, but we'll see what happens. So I don't know. That's a word salad. Hopefully our viewers and listeners will understand what I'm saying, but that's my take on the rate cuts.
Yep. I think that's a great point. And I think kind of the things, that people are always looking at, though, like a lot of times you said, they'll look at like the home mortgage rates. And remember, this is the Titanic or a big ship.
An aircraft carrier. Yeah.
Aircraft carrier. That's the word I was looking for. Another area that would also, help bring down our monthly payments every month. These are state policies, but would be things like property taxes, and states are looking at some kinds of insurance reform. So for any viewers that are interested in what you pay in your rent or for your mortgage every month, take a look at what your states are doing on property taxes and insurance as well. Okay, another great topic this week. It was a huge day and night for Bitcoin on Capitol Hill on Tuesday of this week. So we had Bitcoin Magazine and others have reported on it, but we're going to go straight to the source because you, Brian, were there. So I know this event was a long time in the planning and in the making, but overall, how were all of the events and meetings? How did they go?
Oh, they were great. And I want to give a shout out to, people we work with on a regular basis. Our trade association, the Digital Chamber, and the Digital Power Network, specifically for Bitcoin miners, they did a very nice job. There's a lot of coordination that goes on behind the scenes. I know they worked really hard, so I want to give them a compliment. And also Mike Senich and Patrick Snow at the Bitcoin Voter Project, our kind of political arm, also heavily involved in organizing the political elements of the day, and they did great. So the morning was with through our trade association, a series of policy discussions with a bit of a focus on the Bitcoin Act. So Senator Tim Scott had kind of laid out when he took over as banking chairman, made Cynthia Lummis from Wyoming the chair of the subcommittee on digital assets in the Senate. And they had really three priority bills. One is the Genius Act, which passed for stablecoins. Now they're working on the Clarity Act, or the House version is called the Clarity Act, for a more comprehensive market structure. So who regulates, Ethereum or Solana or all these other digital assets? Is it the SEC? Is it the CFTC? And there's various suggested approaches for that. So they're working on the Clarity Act for the broader digital asset ecosystem now. And then we think the next debate, assuming they get that done this year, which they are all House and Senate leaders say they're aiming to do, then I think the next topic of discussion, there's probably a tax package, which is a sort of a smaller, definitely smaller bite if you're in the eating an elephant analogy, one bite at a time. The tax package, I think, is a smaller bite. And then the next big policy debate is probably the Bitcoin Act and whether the United States should have a more robust strategic Bitcoin reserve than just the one the president put in his executive order. Should it be made permanent through legislation? Should the government be required to acquire Bitcoin? So we talked with the authors, Congressman Begich from Alaska, who is a primary author of the Bitcoin Act in the House, Senator Marino from Ohio, who I know well. He's great. He is also a sponsor of the Bitcoin Act. Pat Harrigan from North Carolina was there to discuss it. Senator Blackburn from Tennessee. We had a good talk about sort of the virtues of it, and then how do we get the conversation going? How do we get the momentum needed to actually get a bill across the line? What are the detractors' concerns? Can we address those? I mean, it was really a pretty in-depth conversation, very enjoyable. Michael Saylor, of course, the ultimate Bitcoin bull, was there. His comments are always fascinating. He, of course, views this as our Louisiana Purchase moment. For a relatively tiny price, we could purchase ownership in the future of money and a very valuable sector of the internet. That's his view. It would be a missed opportunity if the U.S. doesn't do it. So then we talk about, how can we do that? And it's about building a bigger coalition ultimately. In the afternoon, we also met with staff on the House Financial Services Committee to discuss some of their questions about, how should the government custody Bitcoin if we do this? How should we acquire it in budget neutral ways? We kind of got into some of those various ideas that have been floating around. It was a good discussion. And then in the afternoon, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, hosted a policy roundtable we talked about the Clarity Act. We talked about a little bit about Bitcoin. We talked about the potential tax issues that should be resolved. We had representatives from the administration there, Tyler Williams from Treasury. We had Luke Pettit, also newly confirmed as Assistant Secretary for Financial Institutions at Treasury, Patrick Witt, who replaced Bo Hines at the White House. They are working hard, man. They put out their digital asset report. There's like over 100 priority issues to resolve. A variety of agencies have to do it. They have a very heavy lift in terms of coordination. The federal government itself, not just our economy, but that can be an aircraft carrier sometimes. So I think their message was, we're working hard. This takes time. Work with us, be patient with us, and hopefully we'll see more good things come along. The evening event you mentioned, that was the Bitcoin Voter Project hosted a political fundraiser, and we were able to help raise money for pro-Bitcoin candidates. House leadership is very pro-Bitcoin. They made that extremely clear in the policy conversations. They agree with it on that it's good for America and that they need some expertise, some help, because these members have a million priorities. They're not living in our ecosystem day to day. So they really need kind of the information and expertise to help guide them in policy making, which is kind of how a representative democracy is supposed to work. They're saying, look, we see a lot of economic opportunity here. We want the U.S. to be the leader. We need a little bit of advice sometimes. So we followed our in-depth policy discussion with then kind of a political cheerleading event of just, thank you for listening. And we want you to know that Bitcoiners are looking for politicians that understand their point of view and want to champion it and want to help them thrive in the years to come. So started with really technical policy discussions, ended it up with just look, you seem to be really championing our industry and we want to support you politically because we need political leaders who are going to be listening to us, because we just went through a 4-year period where the political leadership in America was trying to put us all out of business and lock up developers and stuff like that. So we married the policy discussion with a political rah-rah event in the evening. We kept the policy separate from the politics, as you must do legally. But there were a lot of people in town all at the same time, so it kind of made sense to stack different types of events, all in a 15-hour period. So it was a very long day, but it was very fun, very exciting. I think you see the picture, we can throw up the picture of the Bitcoin Voter Pack board companies. So you see Mike Senich all the way on the right. He runs it day to day. And then Fred from Mara. We had Matt Schultz from CleanSpark. You see the speaker in the middle. And then my counterparts at Mara and CleanSpark's Jason Browder, Margot Plaisted, and there's me right in the middle. I think the speaker might be the shortest of the group. I'm usually the shortest of the group, but I appreciate any time I can feel a little bit tall. But it was just very, very positive discussions all around, and a reminder that these things take a lot of time and a lot of effort, and we can't take our foot off the gas. So anyway, there's my recap.
That's great. No, that's a great recap. And for, for the viewer's sake, this is the first time I'm hearing the whole comprehensive recap. So that it's very exciting for me. And then one other funny thing that we'll put up on the screen here is there was this 12-foot tall golden statue of President Trump holding a Bitcoin that was on Capitol Hill. Did you see that when you guys were out and about?
I didn't. It was a very rainy day. So, tried to just have Ubers or cars or whatever drive us right up to doors so that we could get inside as quickly as we could and stay out of the rain. And I didn't happen to go on that cross street in front of the Capitol, so I only saw it on the internet afterwards. But I think it's very funny, and I hope it stays there for a while.
And you can see that in the pictures. Very, very cloudy day. A couple of people might even have umbrellas or whatever. So, well, that's great. That's very encouraging to hear that it went so well. The last substantive thing I want to talk about, and we did kind of allude to it earlier, but I did. This is kind of one of these like dialectic questions. It's kind of fun just to think about. Is I want to ask you about the hype around Bitcoin's price. And so we know from the history of the show, and even going back, to when you and Sam hosted this together, that Bitcoin has reached incredible milestones within just even the last few years. And so right now it's holding kind of steady around 115,000. But there's stories out there about people predicting, like we just talked about the other guy talking about, we're going to have a monster 3 months, but we're talking about hitting epic milestones. 200,000, 250,000, 500,000, even $1 million. And so the latest sort of big predictions were that Bitcoin is going to hit $1 million. You had people like Eric Trump and the Winklevoss twins that were predicting that. And so when I ask this question, I'm not like picking on the messengers here, but just a kind of a fun question. Is it helpful, harmful, or indifferent to Bitcoin and Bitcoiners for people to make these type of like hype forecasts?
Well, the nature of Bitcoin being decentralized and supply capped, its success does depend on adoption. It's had individuals, it's had companies and financial institutions, and now it has sovereigns, coming into this market. And like Satoshi said, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy if more and more people see the value and want to hedge their risk of not owning it. Essentially, it's sort of almost a FOMO argument, which I don't typically want to rely on, but it's similar to, the other most famous decentralized, relatively supply capped, although not completely supply capped, free of government control asset is gold. And that's where a lot of people like to store their wealth as a hedge against dollar debasement. It tends to go up and to the right over time. And so I think all of these milestones will be hit, whether they're hit tomorrow or in 10 years, I think depends on how things develop. If the Bitcoin Act passes and the US government ends up acquiring 1 million Bitcoin, and then all the G20 follow suit, then I think maybe we hit these milestones very quickly. and their bull case is probably right. If things take longer, then I think the upward trend takes a little bit longer. But I do think that they are inevitable, and the cheerleading helps speed things along. And it's said frequently by Bitcoiners and bull posters that it's the best money ever created. I mean, it really is. Like, if somebody, I just encourage everybody to watch. Michael Saylor had posted a few months ago a video. There's a PhD, I think a professor, who explained sort of the history of money. And he compares fiatellos, representing dollars, with satoshis, and explains that the fiatellos can be debased anytime there is a crisis, and our politicians tend to expand the definition of crisis further and further every day, which leads to printing more and more dollars, which means each individual dollar that exists is worth a little bit less, which means that your sound money assets, your land, gold, your Bitcoin, are going to appreciate. So how do you weather this storm? How do you ensure that your wealth is not eroded? You allocate some to Bitcoin. And so the faster that happens, the faster the price appreciates. And there's some macro factors that are going to determine whether these price targets are hit quickly or over a decade or more. But I think it is going to happen, because unlike your random stock, where a change in leadership could affect, your revenue, or a different deal might affect your cost of capital, or there are a whole host of things that can affect stock price, whether there's a short squeeze or different market manipulators. It's probably not a fair term to use, but I'll use it anyway. There's a variety of things that can affect asset prices. Bitcoin's independent, and that's kind of the appeal. And it has its own monetary policy that was established in 2009, and it hasn't changed, and I don't think it will ever change, probably. So it's a reliable ticker that kind of climbs this ladder up and to the right forever. So I love their price targets because I think they'll be hit eventually. I just don't know when they're going to be hit. But I do think the cheerleading helps accelerate things by bringing more people into the fold. My 2 cents.
Yeah, that's great. Well, that was the last substantive segment. I know we're up against the clock, so we'll try to fit in 2 more fun segments real quick before the end of the show today. In a new segment that we introduced last week, it's a game called What's the Headline? So I'll provide the context of an actual news story, and then each of us will supply a made-up headline. So story number 1, Congress passed and President Biden signed a law to ban TikTok in the U.S. unless Communist China divests. President Trump comes into office and delays implementing the law like 3 or 4 times, using it as a bargaining chip to make a huge deal. U.S. and Chinese negotiators this week seem to be working out a deal for an American spinoff controlled by funders from Oracle, Andreessen Horowitz, and others. So, Brian, the U.S. and China reach a deal on TikTok. What's the headline?
Saving TikTok to own the libs of TikTok, because libs of TikTok has created a social media empire, just by pointing out crazy people on TikTok. And if TikTok were banned, then, libs of TikTok couldn't own the libs quite as effectively, maybe. I will say, I was there in the first administration where they considered banning TikTok. The president asked me, should I ban TikTok? My answer was, look, the issues, the algorithm, if it's influencing the way people think, data collection, if they're able to create pattern of life, intelligence basically on Americans, that's not great. So if you can work out those issues, there's hundreds of millions of Americans who love it. So banning it, and you might alienate all the youth of America. So I said, I don't know the status of working out those issues, but those are my thoughts. And he kind of waved me away. Yeah, I know. he's looking for yes or no votes. And I gave him a mealy-mouthed answer, which I think was unsatisfying to him. But all right, your turn. U.S. and China reaching a deal on TikTok. What's the headline?
Yes. So my headline is TikTok 2.0. It's actually to your last point that you just made. TikTok 2.0, Communist China still allowed to spy on Americans who watch stupid cat videos. All right. Well, story number 2. This is a short one and it's unfolding. I'm sure it'll be an interesting week in the news. President Trump traveled to the UK this week. He was greeted by King Charles III. They rode together in a horse-drawn carriage flanked by British military officials in traditional British getup. They had cutlasses, wigs, and the whole 9 yards. So, Brian, President Trump visits the UK. They roll out the red carpet and the pageantry. What's the headline?
The horse-drawn carriage ride got me. So the headline is King Charles greets Trump with horse-drawn Oval Office. And we got to put up the picture. He has been making the old Oval Office gold, beautiful gold leaf everywhere in the Oval, and like gold leaf picture frames and all sorts of things in the Oval. It is getting more gold by the day. And then I saw him in the horse-drawn carriage and I was like, okay, they get it. They know who they're welcoming. The King of Gold. And if you've ever been to his properties, Mar-a-Lago or other properties, he does love gold. So the and the old school like family crests, the Trump family crest is everywhere at his properties. I think he really does have a soft spot for the British people, the British monarchy, and I think that has played into the design of a lot of his buildings and now the Oval Office. And I think they were pitch perfect with the way they welcomed him.
And I don't know if this is true or not, but I've heard even the toilet in his plane is gold. Again, I don't know if that's true, but that it fits the brand. That's for sure. My headline is MAGA meets monarchy. Trump takes a victory lap in a horse-drawn Brexit mobile.
Nice.
All right. And then for our final segment, we'll end in the traditional way with the grab bag. And I got out of politics for a reason, but I'll have a little bit of a political rant here. So for my segment, I'm going to give a shout out to Nate Bargatze hosting the Emmys. I thought it was a breath of fresh air to have somebody outside of the sort of Hollywood, New York City bubble hosting the show. And I think a lot of other viewers felt that way. It was the highest viewership since 2021, up 8% over last year. And there was an increase of 76% in live streaming viewers over 2021. So to be clear, I don't think people watch the Emmys for Seth Rogen, Stephen Colbert, or this sniveling anti-ICE, anti-Israel, pro-Hamas hack from the TV show Hacks. I think they watched it because Nate Bargatze hosted it. And the popular press didn't like the show because they didn't think it was politically charged enough. I read that as politically leftist enough. Instead, the show was wholesome, funny. The opening played off his famous George Washington SNL skit. They did it about Philo T. Farnsworth, the inventor of the TV. It was great. He threatened to start a swear jar after the lady used the F-bomb to smear ice. And then even better, he had this little shtick throughout where at the beginning he donated his salary, $100,000 to the Boys and Girls Club. And then he set a shot clock for winner speeches at 45 seconds. For every second the winner went over, he deducted 1,000, and they had like the screen, like it was counting down the money as people went over. And then if people went under, he added $1,000. So predictably, the speeches they went over, it was like a $60,000 deficit by the end of the show. Yet he donated $250,000. I think CBS or somebody else donated $100,000. Good for him. All of it to say, we need more of this. I never watched these shows. I actually watched it and used my DVR to fast forward through the speeches, but good show and nice. I thought it was a great job. So shout out to Nate Bargatze.
Yeah, that's great. Good for him. Totally clean comedian, absolutely exploding on the scene. Love it. And yes, I did watch just the opening sketch and monologue, and then I didn't watch any more of it because I was like, oh yeah, I want to see how he handles this. And he was good. So good for Nate. My grab bag segment is a clip that's been going around of Billy Corgan from the Smashing Pumpkins.
Not Bill Burr.
No.
Everyone thought it was Bill Burr.
No. They do kind of look alike, actually. But no, Billy Corgan from the Smashing Pumpkins sat down with Bill Maher on his podcast, Club Random. And he had this great riff that's like 2 minutes long. Encourage everybody to take a look at that. And it's about how when he was in his 20s, he was famous. He was on the cover of Rolling Stone. He said like $1 million by the time he was like 24. That was followed by platinum records and many, many more millions of dollars. He still, many years later, decades later, is playing stadiums. And he pointed out that now he brings his little kids. He has a little girl. He'll bring out on stage with him. And he pointed out that throughout his career, he had a lot of success, but there was still this kind of emptiness because he didn't have unconditional love in his life. And he realized that everything, even his relationship with his bandmates, who were, if you think about it, in the entertainment industry, they're really your business partners. They may be your friends as well, but your business partners. And he kind of pointed out that now that he has this kind of relationship with his kids, this unconditional love with his kids, it makes the transactional pieces, his music career, fun. He can appreciate that because he has the thing that's more important, which is this family life. And the quote there in the tweet, "There's no Valhalla at the top of Rock Mountain." He then expands on, which I think is very eloquent and artful. And then he kind of expands on his perspective, and it's so heartwarming. And this was, I think, this may have been the podcast where they talked about how Bill Maher was really bummed out about Charlie Kirk because he had Charlie Kirk in that seat just a short time ago. And, he said, didn't agree with him very much, but I love the guy. Who's a very sweet man and obviously was being honest with his beliefs and everything. And we should have conversations like that. So then Billy did this great, great riff. I mean, seeing a rock star say that I would trade a stadium show with 40,000 people away for my family 10 out of 10 times, I think is an excellent message, very heartwarming and uplifting.
Only unconditional love in some facet of your life gives you the proper perspective to appreciate what is great about transactional things, but allows you to see them for what they are, which is transactional. There's no Valhalla at the top of Rock Mountain. There isn't. And I've been there multiple times. So when I stand in front of 65,000 people, in my hierarchical mind, my family is still above that. I tell my kids all the time, and they're still little kids, and hopefully it'll endure in their brain. I tell them, because they'll come see me play. They'll come on stage with me. I mean, we pull up to where the Mets play in New York, and my daughter goes, "How many people am I going to dance in front of today?" And I said, "Well, 41,000. She goes, "Okay." And then an hour later, she's on stage with me dancing in front of 40,000 people. They're having these immense peak experiences. But I tell them over and over again, no matter what you see Daddy do, no matter what you hear about Daddy, good or bad, you're more important than that. You are so much more important than that to me. I would trade all of this for you.
So yes, go hug your kids, kiss your wife, tell everybody you love that you love them because life is too short. So that's all for this week's episode. Glad we could cover a lot of ground and end with, I think, hopefully a heartfelt note this week. But thank you, everybody, for joining. Remember to follow me on X at Morgenstern NJ. Like and subscribe. Follow us on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll see you all next week for another episode of the Peer to Peer Policy Pod. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next time.